Well, Jerry and Deb are going to kind of do what the Kleins did the other night and share from the pulpit mic here. But I'm so excited to have this opportunity. And we finally found a Sunday night where we could work them in. I feel bad that we had to wait so long, but looking forward to that opportunity. And so hopefully this will be a great encouragement to you. Thank you, both of you, for serving. Right. And thank you for the opportunity to have you share here a little bit tonight. Lord bless you guys.
Well, thank you. It is good to be here and to be able to show what the Lord allowed us to do there in New Zealand. Want to thank you for your prayers. I asked prayer before we left, and we were well aware that you were praying for us, and we appreciate it very much.
I'm usually the silent partner in this duo, so if I get nervous or stutter, please forgive me. But I too want to thank everyone for their prayers, and we're coming out on a busy weekend as this. I know there's a lot going on. It's good to see our good friend Dr. Kober here. We appreciate the years that we've been able to have him in our home and get to know him better. And I'm also glad to see that the Loffers are here tonight. In the service this morning, I was asked if they knew their father, or if Blake knew his father-in-law was preaching this morning, and that's why he avoided coming to the service, because he didn't want how can I say this?
Just say
because you and I, they thought maybe you and I are still not speaking to one another after you tried to not vote me into the membership of the church. But I assured them I forgave him and that I love him as I should, as the one another state. So all is good, in case you were wondering. So let's get to business.
And if you weren't here back then, why, it'll take a little explanation for that.
I'll tell you later. You know, I didn't know a whole lot about New Zealand. I knew it was near Australia and that it was not a country in Africa. But before we started our adventure, but I did know and learn a lot about it as we approached our time in New Zealand. There are really two islands there, and they're close together, but there's a strait of Cook Strait that connects them, and the only way you can get from one island to the other is either by a ferry or by flying, which I thought was really interesting.
The words you see up here are a greeting. It is Maori.
Kia ora, Aotearoa. and that means, welcome to New Zealand.
We heard that a lot while we were there. We heard a lot of Maori words. A lot of the places, lakes and towns had Maori words for them that I don't even try to pronounce them myself.
In the early 1200s, or about the mid-1200s, it's believed it was the first people who came to New Zealand. And they believed that it was people from these islands in the Polynesian islands. They used wind currents, the stars, and winds to navigate to find their way to this foreign land, this place that they had never seen before. Possibly those peoples now are what are known as the Maori people, the native people of New Zealand. Next came Abel Tasman. He was a Dutch explorer, and he was the first European to get to New Zealand, and he sighted the country in 1642. And he had an unfortunate encounter with the Maori, and so he didn't set foot on the island himself. But then in 1769, James Cook, who is the most noted person in history to navigate around and set foot on New Zealand, he came in 1769. He made maps of the country, very detailed maps. He wrote about the Maori. Unfortunately, his first encounter ended with a fight, and some Maori were killed, so it did not turn out well.
We were in the city of Invercargill, one of the southernmost cities in the world, the south end of the South Island, a city of about 57,000 people. And it was from Kansas City that we left. We flew probably close to 9,000 miles. We did some time travel on our way down. We flew into another day, lost one day, and we left here in the fall, and we got there off the plane in the spring. And so that's some serious time travel that we had. This is a shot I took out of the plane window coming into Invercargill. Just kind of curious myself. Someone asked us what was one of the most remarkable things, and we've got lots of remarkable things that we want to talk about. But first of all, to mention that it's Art and Deb Brammer that we were there to replace. They were well overdue for a furlough because of COVID. And Tay Street Baptist Church is where they ministered and have been called to. And that's where we went to minister as well. Their house we lived in while we were there. And their house was where that arrow is. And right one block away was a internationally known park, Queen's Park it is called, and we thoroughly enjoyed going over to Queen's Park. The main entrance, the gates that you see, going into it, a manned rotunda. It had a duck pond with all kinds of scenery and architecture. There were gardens galore. It was springtime, so everything was all bloomed out. There was not only a rose garden, which fascinated us, but there were Chinese gardens, botanic gardens, herb gardens, rock gardens, a bog garden there. And of course, we went there and walked quite a bit. We enjoy walking here in Creston, the paths that are there in Queen's Park, in McKinley Park it is, and going up to the hospital. And we went on quite a few walks. There's miles of footpaths there in Queen's Park.
These roses are from all over. There's more colors than I ever thought existed, and some of them are literally as large as saucers. The climate there is conducive to that kind of growth because it's moist and warm most of the time. It's a very temperate climate.
I had to have Debbie stand by some of these flowering trees just so you could see how tall and how big they were. We were in awe at Queen's Park when we first got there, the beauty Again, being springtime, everything was in bloom. But Queens Park had tennis courts, it had cricket fields, it had a fitness track with exercise stations, a playground, an aviary. This flower we called our candy corn flower because of its color. And this particular tree we called the popcorn tree because the little flowers on it looked like popcorn to us. There was an animal reserve, there was Frisbee golf course, there was an 18-hole golf course. Again, miles of pathways that we walked, not the same path more than once or twice.
Many of the trees were very, very large, as you'll see. Some of them have been cut down and formed into, they've sculpted them into different shapes just to draw interest or for the kids to climb on. All kinds of trees, and they put them all together, the variety of trees, close together, and it just makes for a beautiful, beautiful scenery.
This is some of the things they carved out of the tree trunks that they cut down. I couldn't make that go for some reason, I'm not sure why.
Like I said, because of the climate there, things can grow to be quite large.
Plants that we didn't know what they were, but beautiful trees and gardens and landscaping. Pathways through it all. We would walk over there several times a week and enjoy the different things that we saw.
This is just to show you how large the leaves are on some of those plants. It's just incredible. This crossed over the duck pond. It was fun to see all the ducks.
So one of the remarkable things of New Zealand was Queens Park, which was 1 block away from where we spent our time there in the Brammers' home.
You know, even as we enjoyed the beauty of all of it, you know, I was reminded of Psalm 19 that we talked about a few weeks ago, that the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament showeth his handiwork. And you see that. It's so apparent, the awe-inspiring scenery of New Zealand, and yet those people are without hope. They're apathetic to the gospel and don't see their need for spiritual things.
We were there for Christmas. These are the fountains out in front of the gate. They put up a Christmas tree and lit it up at night, and it was added a great deal of Christmas spirit. One day we were coming home from church, and there were several different bagpipe bands out in the park performing. We weren't sure just exactly what was going on. There's sound to this if you hit the sound button, I guess. Couldn't help but stop and look. There were several different bagpipe bands. This was one of many. Then there was also a drum corps group that played.
If you watch how they do those drums and they swirl the
Mallets.
I was just amazed. There's a heavy influence from the United Kingdom in New Zealand, of course. The United Kingdom, mostly England, but even Scotland had a big influence and a lot of investment in the country there.
In many respects, the land looks quite a bit like it does here in Iowa. As you can see here, rolling hills, winding roads through those hills. And it was interesting to drive around in the farmland area, in the area in the center of the island, and reminds us quite a bit of what we see around here, except you could see that the mountains or the hills got a little bigger as they went around. This grove of trees was on the south side of the island, receiving wind off the South Pole, and of course, it had done its job to this grove of trees.
It's not uncommon to see trees like that. That's the effect of the South Pole and the wind.
But unlike Iowa or Montana, you see the farmer's field in the foreground, and we never could imagine driving over the hill and seeing the ocean as you see out there on the horizon. We never grew tired of that. The ocean, huge expanses of beach that had not a soul on them. And that was something that we just never grew tired of going to see and driving around and looking at the different places. Sand beaches, gravel beaches, rock beaches.
And the color of the ocean is just the color you see it. It's a beautiful turquoise or an aqua blue, very clear.
This beach was called Gemstone Beach. You could find gemstones. We didn't. We looked, but we didn't find any gemstones. Found some pretty rocks, big sand beaches with a few people on it. There was a beach close to Invercargill, a public beach, where you'd find quite a few people sometimes, but nothing like the beaches that I've seen in California or in Maine. This is a rock beach, but you can't tell it from this picture at a distance. You see some lines in that rock. This is a petrified forest. You get down and walk up close and personal, and you can see the trees that are laying there in this rock beach. A petrified forest. People would drive out onto the beaches. You, in many of these pictures, see sheep, sheep everywhere you went. This is one of 4 lighthouses that I was able to photograph while I was there. I mentioned to you this morning, I kind of have a habit of doing that. The Waipapa Point Light. And of course, the farmers' fields right up next to places that you go to and look at. Something that was unique about it was on the west coast is the Southern Alps. And on the west coast, you have not only the ocean, but you see the mountains in the background. Mountains that are much like what our Montana mountains were, glacial formed mountains. But we had no ocean to look at in the same picture.
As I told you, or maybe I didn't, that before anyone came to New Zealand, it was an island of birds. Only birds. Those were the only animals that would be found on the islands. And it wasn't until people came there to settle and brought with them predators that would either kill the birds or their eggs or eat the same foods that the birds were trying to eat. And so there are several that are near extinction, and they're doing their best to build those species up again. These are water birds. This one is especially notable. This first thing they told us was to watch out for the kias, because the kias are known for their antics and for their intelligence and for their curiosity. And they have been known to, if your car is parked nearby, to go and pull the rubber sealer around your windows off or chew and bite pieces of it off. They consider them to be probably the most intelligent birds. They're parrots, alpine parrots. This is a tui. It's a beautiful, beautiful bird and has a beautiful song. You don't see them very often, but the color is just very brilliant.
We would hear them as we walked in the park, but very seldom could you see them.
This is a weka. A weka is a wingless bird. He's usually very friendly because he likes to steal things. Could steal your phones. He's been known to steal phones, potato chips, and even shoes. And they're active at day. The thing about the wekas is they make nests. And this one wasn't especially friendly because she was protecting her young in the nest down there in the weeds. And then you'll see signs like this all over the countryside as well. That symbol at the top represents a kiwi bird. The kiwi bird is one of the national symbols. In fact, New Zealand's their nickname is kiwi. The kiwi bird is also a wingless bird. He has little bitty wings, about an inch long, way down under all his feathers. The things that are different about him is his feathers don't look like a normal bird's feathers. They're more hair-like. And his beak is very long, and his nostrils are at the tip of his beak rather than up by his eyes. He has very strong feet so that he can run or kick at predators. He comes out only at night, which is one reason why you don't see them very often. And unlike most birds, he doesn't build nests, he burrows in the ground.
We didn't see a kiwi up close and personal. We would have gone to Stewart Island, taken a boat to Stewart Island to do that, and we didn't do that.
This is a yellow-eyed penguin. These are also endemic to New Zealand with the little chin strap. Penguins are very shy. They leave in the morning about daybreak. They go into the ocean and feed all day. And just after dusk, they come back to the nest and regurgitate some of those fish to feed their young. They don't let you take pictures of them because their eyes are very sensitive and their ears are very sharp. So if you talk or make any loud noises, they'll turn around, go back in the ocean, and not come back. They might not feed their young for that day. And this is a little blue penguin, also particular to the island of New Zealand. They don't get much bigger than 12 inches tall, and if you notice those feet again.
We never saw a penguin. We tried several times. You have to go at dusk to various places where they might be, and yet when we went, we didn't see any. We could have paid $40 each and gone and probably seen a penguin, but you wouldn't be able to take a picture of it or do anything but just tell about it, so we just didn't pay $40 to go see a penguin. However, we saw this guy laying out on the beach one day, a sea lion laying there, and he looking at me as I was looking at him. Looks like I'm fairly close, but they tell you not to go close. I just have a good zoom on my camera. And he did a little posing for us while we were taking his pictures, and I couldn't help but just snapping quite a few of him. This lady was a little too close. You know, in Montana, when you were out and about, you had to look out for the bears, and you didn't get close to bears. Well, they tell you here, don't get close to the sea lion, because they're dangerous. I'm not sure how that guy could be dangerous, but I'll just take their word for it. That lady was a little closer than what they're supposed to be.
For as awkward as they look, they can move remarkably fast when they feel threatened, and for that reason, they don't want people to be near them.
I was glad he got up and walked so that I could see how he did that. It looked like he just would lay there, but he walked for a while.
This little buddy in the picture there with the black feathers and the long orange beak is a taria, an oyster catcher. They live near the ocean and the lakes, and they'll fly around and look for clams and oysters, and they'll fly down, we saw one pick one up, and then he dropped it on the beach and then came back after it. They poke holes in the shell and eat the meat.
There's a close-up picture of the oyster catcher, red eyes and all. And then we were able to see some fur seals when we were at Milford Sound, on the cliffs there in Milford Sound. You can see the fur. This was a mama. There's a baby following her up onto the rock. She got up higher, and he came up a ways and slid back in and came back out and slid back in and just having a good time. These are porpoises that are swimming right around these paddle borders. They're very friendly, and we could tell that they were just enjoying their time there with these paddle borders. We took a picture of this. We aren't sure what it was. It's not a porpoise. Larger fin and a pointy nose. So I'm not sure what we took a picture of there. The only wild game that I saw in New Zealand was always in a pasture behind fences. This is what I would call an elk, but they called it over there a wapiti. but it's an elk-like animal. Here's a pen of red deer that were looking at us as we were looking at them. They were trying to figure out what we were doing. Even out driving around in the countryside, you'd find a pasture full of game. They raised them for their antlers and for meat.
The Maori use them in some of their medicines and other maybe worship things, so they're very important to them.
On the southeast side of the island, there was a rainforest, one of the southernmost rainforests, and thick forest. It's hard to get pictures of it when we were driving. There were places where it would almost cover the road as you were driving along. We stopped and went to a waterfall in that area, and this is hiking back up to the waterfall, or tramping. You don't hike, you tramp. It's going tramping instead of hiking. Ferns are part of New Zealand. There are scores of different ferns, they say, but the silver fern is one of their national emblems as well. Ferns that grow close to the ground, ferns that are tall as trees. We went up to this waterfall. This kind of reminds me of something we would see in Montana. McLean Falls, it was called. Several different levels to it. People up at the top, in the middle. We were down another level. Dairy farms everywhere you went. This picture is not necessarily about the cattle and the dairy farms, but about the hedges. One of the remarkable things or striking things we saw, there was hedges. Everywhere you went, there were hedges. These hedges outlined the fields and property boundaries. They had fence lines as well, but hedges, which also provided shelter for the animals that would be out there, the cattle and the sheep. But everywhere you went, you saw hedges. And I'm not saying just short little hedges like we think when we think of a hedge. Tall hedges, and trimmed, meticulously trimmed, all the way up to the top, and even the top of them, trimmed flat. I was hoping to see how they did that, but I never did. This hedge is meticulously trimmed at New Zealand's only castle, the Larnac Castle, and it was at or close to Dunedin there, and we wanted to go see New Zealand's only castle.
Larnac Castle is at the very end of a peninsula on Otago Bay. William Larnac had this house built. He was very wealthy. He was born into a wealthy family, and then also through his own resourcefulness became very wealthy on his own. He built this for his first wife. It took 3 years, 200 men, 3 years to build the cement outside, and then they had 13 more years before they finished the interior. They got wood from all over the world and marble from Europe, and it's a very fancy home. We do know that he was a banker in Melbourne, in Australia, where he was born. He followed the gold rush, and there he set up nearby sort of a bank. He was the manager, and he had a tent set up with dogs, a gun, and strong boxes, and that was the bank. Later, he followed the gold rush to Otago in New Zealand, okay, and there he managed the Bank of Otago in Dunedin, and where he served the miners who found the gold. He was a merchant through his career. He was a banker. He was involved in shipping, merchant shipping, farming, real estate, lumber, speculation, politics. Near the end of his life, he made some poor choices, and he was facing bankruptcy and the loss of his seat in Parliament. And so he went into one of the committee rooms in the Parliament building and took his life.
Tragic end. Beautiful gardens there at the castle. This is a gazebo that overlooked the Otago Bay down below, and it was a nice stop to see. This lighthouse out at the point is Nugget Point Light that I showed you this morning, used for my message this morning. And one of those that we were able to photograph.
You park at the car park, that's what they call parking lots, and then you take this long, long walk to the tip of the rock there where the light is located. And as you get over the top, then there's a deck that's below there where you can stand. And you can see the wind was very strong and very cold that day. You had to hold on sometimes so that you didn't get blown.
When we stood
Away.
on that deck down below the light, you had to hold on. And I felt like if I'd have lifted my arms, we'd have just lifted right out of that deck and taken off. The wind was very strong. Of course, it faces the South Pole, and that's kind of how it is there. And this is what, of course, that light protects ships from, the rocks out in the bay there. This is Slope Point. It is the southernmost point in the southern island of New Zealand. It's about 200 miles closer if you look at that sign, actually 337 kilometers. We had to do a lot of math. Closer to the South Pole than it is to the equator. It's just about 3,000 miles from the South Pole and a little more than that to the equator. We went also then to Cathedral. Nope, this is the Slope Point, I think. It's hard for me to see. Cathedral Caves we went to, and this is where we were at there on that beach. You had to go to the Cathedral Caves when the tide was out because the ocean would come right up into this cave at high tide. And so we went there on low tide and went inside this huge cavern. One of the most remarkable things that we saw was something I showed you prior to going, but to be there and see them firsthand, the Meraki boulders. Spherical boulders, they say, consist of mud and silt and clay and are cemented by calcite up on the beach, laying there in various states of decay or as the weather works on them. So we had to go and see the Meraki boulders. This one's still stuck in a bank there. Experts say that it took 5 to 8 million years for these concretions to be rolled up from the seafloor. But you and I know that it only took a few years during and following the catastrophic flood of Genesis chapter 6. But they were indeed remarkable things that the Lord has left us to look at. The hills and the plains gave way to the mountains on the west coast. All the way the length of the west coast of the southern island is the Southern Alps. And they were indeed mountains. This, I thought, was snow, some early snow up on this peak, but it was not. They said it was the color of the rock up there. Beautiful, deep lakes. As we were traveling, we saw this rainbow and had to try to get a picture of it. I couldn't get it all in one frame. We went to Queenstown. Everybody's got to go to Queenstown. In fact, all the tourists go to Queenstown. Traveling up there along this lake, all of a sudden you begin to see Queenstown that is built on the side of these mountains. And it was a little different than what we had imagined. Queenstown is probably the richest city in all of New Zealand. To own a home there, you'd have to be a millionaire. And it's a place that there's ski resorts around and just lots to do. You can't see it But in this clear cut on the hill behind it is a trolley or a tram that goes to the top. And of course, I had to take a ride up and take a look down. You can see Queenstown below, what's called the Remarkables, the Remarkable Mountains there across from it. And I can't pronounce the name of the lakes.
It's Wakatipu.
Wakatipu Lake, that is, that Queenstown is nestled up alongside.
And literally, the houses are slanted. We took pictures of our car, and sometimes it's like this in a parking lot. Sometimes it's like this in a parking lot. It's a real trick to drive there, and especially to park.
We left Queenstown, drove north a ways along that lake, Wakatipu, and saw Mount Earnslaw. Mount Earnslaw is another one of the larger mountains in the Southern Alps, almost 10,000 feet. This is not Mount Earnslaw. There it's starting to show up. When we were up at the Moraki Boulders Beach, we spent the night in Amaru because I wanted to go up and see Mount Cook. Mount Cook is the tallest mountain in that range of mountains, over 12,000 feet high. And so we were that far north on the island. We spent the night and drove on over and up to see Mount Cook. That's it in the background's kind of got into the clouds and you couldn't see it real well. You drive along this lake. What's the name of that lake?
Hukaki.
The Pataki Lake, that one is. And we took a hike back in there. You crossed a couple of suspension bridges to go back. It's not hiking, it's tramping, excuse me. We took a tramp back there. This is not Mount Cook. This is some mountains along the side. A glacier, though, on that mountain. This is the second bridge that we crossed.
Suspension bridge.
And finally, Mount Cook started showing up as we got closer to it. This is as close as we got. We were thinking maybe a 45-minute tramp, and yet we were 2 hours in and still lacked about an hour to get over to that saddle where we could have seen the base of the mountain, but we didn't bring water and we weren't prepared, so we turned around and this is as close as we got. We also went to Milford Sound. You have to go to Milford Sound. It's actually a fjord. This whole section in the oval there is Fiordland National Park. A fjord is a long, narrow inlet from the ocean, bordered by steep cliffs, formed by glacial action. And Milford Sound is the only fjord that you can drive to and see. You go up over a mountain pass, through a tunnel, and then down to sea level again to go to Milford Sound. We took a boat ride, and it was a fascinating thing. When we pulled in there, it was raining. We couldn't see a thing going up over the divide and through the tunnel. But as we got down again to sea level, the clouds were higher, and we were able to see.
People say that if you're going to Milford Sound, it's good if you go on a rainy day because then you see the hundreds of waterfalls that are there. There are only a few that are permanent. The others come when it rains. And so it was a good thing we went on a rainy day. We were a little disappointed, but once we saw the waterfalls, we understood what they meant.
There was water falling down those mountains everywhere. This is nearing the outlet or inlet from the ocean. They did not go out much further than this.
This is called Windy Point. It's where the two rock mountains come close together, so that wind is coming stronger through there to come through. And so it makes for wavy water. Sometimes the waves are as high as 6 feet. We were lucky it wasn't that high, but it was a very bouncy ride.
It was smooth sailing in the sound itself, but the closer you got to the inlet or outlet, the rougher it got. It was rather an interesting thing. Fresh water out to salt water.
They say that some of these waterfalls are taller than the ones at Niagara Falls. They're very tall waterfalls.
So that was certainly a remarkable sight for us to be able to behold. A fjord. Not even many ocean places have fjords. There are other places that have fjords, but the boat would pull right up close and personal to these waterfalls, to where you would almost get wet from the spray. You know, as remarkable as all of the scenery was that we saw, above and beyond all those beautiful things, the most remarkable thing about New Zealand was the church family and the ministry that God called us to. And of course, we shouldn't be surprised about that because, God's people are the same wherever you go. You welcomed us here as we came to Creston, Iowa, and they welcomed us there and made us feel right at home right from the beginning. And that was the highlight of our time in New Zealand, to be able to minister there at Tay Street Baptist Church. This was a song leader, Matthew. I started having coffee with Matthew every week, and ultimately he gave me his testimony, and he said that he was saved under the ministry of Norman Hogue when he was over there relieving the Brammers on a previous furlough. And so that was interesting. When I saw Norman, Pastor Hogue, at the spring concert, I had to go over and tell him about Matthew, and he remembered that as well. Christmas, we were there at Christmas. Christmas in the summertime, that was certainly a remarkable thing.
Unique.
And as I mentioned, pray for us at Christmas because we're going to be a long ways away from family. Well, you were praying for us. Things went very well, and it didn't even seem like it was happening, really. A man that sang a solo there at Christmas time, and we had a choir that got together at Christmas. There were many things that I was able to do, or I had to do, I guess I should say, or was pressed upon me. I had a funeral. The last remaining charter member died, a lady by the name of Joyce, and I had her funeral. Pastor Art felt kind of bad in not being there. Big Christmas banquet. They killed the fatted hog and had the hog there at that Christmas banquet. Debbie was able to carry out a ministry to the grade school people.
This is the Discovery Club. They met every other Friday night. It's elementary kids that would come to the church. We would play games for a little while. It's too small and not organized enough to have a real Awana program, so they tried to do little games, a snack, and then we had lessons. And the lessons that were given were about attitudes. Are you going to choose to be discouraged? Are you going to choose to have hope? Are you going to choose to be angry? Or are you going to choose to have joy? And the children were very good listeners and really participated well, and I enjoyed the time I had with them and getting to know them.
This gym used to be as I mentioned this morning, it was a truck garage. They've turned into a gym. We would have the teenagers then on the other Friday, every other Friday, and we carried out a ministry to them. They would do the same format, play a game, have a snack, and then a devotion. A lot of the teenagers and children were not able to come to these Friday nights because they lived so far out of town. And the pianist there, a gal from Korea, a very accomplished pianist. Debbie Brammer was the main pianist, and her being gone, they didn't know if we'd have a pianist always, but Charlotte came all the time.
When I was sick, Charlotte was concerned when I had that sinus infection. And they talked to Jerry, and when he came back Sunday night, they said, you need to take her to the extended care, the, what's it called, after hours.
After hours doctor.
And he said, okay, you know how husbands do. And Charlotte got busy and dialed the number on the phone and handed it to Jerry and said, here's the doctor. And so he made the appointment, and when he came home Sunday night, he said, you have an appointment at 8:30. Well, I was thinking 8:30 Monday morning, but no, it was 8:30 that night. So I was able to see the doctor, get the medicines that I needed, and it was a huge help to me. I was having a lot of problems.
Beside the pulpit ministry, I visited in a rest home. There was a fellow that was recovering from cancer and had surgery that I visited in the hospital. One of the faithful church members' father, by the name of John Jones, was in a rest home and near the end of his life, and I visited him a couple times and shared the gospel with him. This is the last Sunday that we were there. They had a big going away. They called it a light lunch. I'd call it a potluck, but they called it a light lunch for us, in honor of us.
Every potluck or even the banquet, the ladies would bring their dishes that were from their native countries, their special dishes. So we got to taste a variety of foods. Well, I'll let you explain it later.
The gentleman at this table was a fellow that I visited in the hospital. He recovered and got back to church. These elderly saints were there regularly on the front row.
And the lady in the white hair and the blue was a visitor. The lady over there in the black invited her to come to Sunday, and she was so excited about the message, about the warmth of the people, that she came back, and she's been coming back ever since. The older man who is Andrew, turned 91 while we were there. He's there every Sunday.
As you can see, the amount of people that were there for the morning services, the children, young people, young families,
all ages were involved in the church, and many different ethnic groups. We had South Koreans, we had Chinese, we had Fiji, Philippines.
This is a Ukrainian couple and their daughter that were there and part of the church.
Ironically, very few were Kiwis. These people would come, like Jerry said, they come to work. And so that's why they were there, in addition to the students that came from the Institute.
These two are not husband and wife, but two very influential people as far as we were concerned. Linda stepped right up and helped us at every turn and had all kinds of advice that she gave with regards to what to do and what not to do. Malcolm was one of the main leaders of the church, one of the men. This couple from Fiji, faithful people.
Zach's grandfather was a pastor in Fiji, and so he was very sensitive to the work of the ministry and to being a help to the pastors or to us. He would work all night and then on his way home stop and mow the grass or take out the garbage. They were very, very faithful.
This is Joseph and Jackie, the couple that I mentioned that worked at the Southern Institute of Technology. As a recruiter and a mentor to incoming overseas students, they, every Sunday, would bring visitors, students that were in from other countries, and they would just invite them to church. You want to learn English? Come to church with me. That'll help you with your English.
So the amazing thing about the church is there's so many different people groups that we're not just reaching they're not just reaching Kiwis there. We're reaching way out into the islands and into Asia and other places, because the gospel is being taught there, and they go back to their homes to visit, and they share the gospel with their families and their friends.
Charlotte and her husband Edgar are pianist, and her husband.
The lady on the far left is Hannah. Hannah is from Fiji, I believe, and her husband is a Kiwi, and She has a daughter who was saved, came with her to church when she was young, fell away, and her granddaughter has no interest in spiritual things. And she would come and talk to me, and we would pray together that she would have an opportunity to once again speak to them and encourage them and see if they would respond.
Lots of children from many, many different backgrounds, ethnicities.
These are the Roaches. John is Amari, and his wife Sue. Sue was needing a pacemaker, and when they finally diagnosed that, they said, okay, we'll put you on the list so you can come, when the time comes for you to get the pacemaker, it'll be about 18 months. And she was pretty devastated, and so we talked about it, and we began to pray, and within 2 months or less, they called back and said, okay, you can come. We're ready for you.
They are raising their granddaughter, Nirvana. Nirvana was a little ray of sunlight in the church, bouncing around, following Debbie, following me. This is a couple that I mentioned this morning, I think, maybe I didn't, that is considering becoming the next pastor of the church. They are Kiwis, and he currently works for Friends of Israel as a representative for New Zealand and Australia. And he's had training, a degree at Dallas Theological Seminary, online courses, and he has been attending, they have been attending the church, and just as the Brammers were leaving, they indicated that he would like to consider being a pastor. And so the Brammers had lots of correspondence with them as they were back here in the States. We were working with them, working out a schedule so that he could preach while I was there once a month. He was in the pulpit so the people could kind of get used to him and his preaching. And we were able to lead the church through a challenging business meeting where they appropriated on their budget a part-time salary for a pastor. They've never had to pay a pastor previously. And so that was almost doubling what their expenditures were. And it was a challenge for us to be able to help out and to lead in those things. Little Nirvana wanted a picture with us so she could show her kids at school. And we said, well, Nirvana, we'd like a picture with you as well so we could bring it back and show people here. I don't know if you might have any questions. I realize as I look at the clock, it's been a long time that we've sat here. However, if you did have a question that I can't answer, I'll try.
You think there won't be much of a cultural change when the people speak English and it's a modern country, but there are a lot of things to get used to. And so it was challenging, but it was also a time of growing in the Lord, and as we ministered to others, the people, even though they were so close-knit, they were not exclusive. They were eager to meet the new people and include them, and eager to get out and share the gospel with others. And so we encouraged them with that, and in doing so, we're encouraged ourselves.
This is the passage that I challenged them with as we left, that if God is in you having a pastor and not a missionary leading your church, he will provide. He has promised that he will build his church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. It was a huge step of faith, but by faith, they have their mortgage paid off, all the buildings are paid for, and it'll be interesting for us to see what God will do there. Yes?
What would be, or do you know, the percentage of like first-generation Christians compared to those that maybe grew up, have grandparents that were saved years and years ago, and just a curiosity?
I think there probably is a good number of them, larger percentage, that are first-generation Christians. It's interesting when you like the Zach from Fiji, whose dad was a pastor, some of these people from Korea came as believers, and there's ministries in Korea, South Korea, that are pretty active and viable, and they came seeking a church that they could continue in. How far back that goes, I don't know.
I'd say the biggest challenge that has been for the missionaries is that because of the people groups and where they're from, there's a lot of transitioning. They find a better job, so they move on. So they'll have people come, and they'll have a good solid core group in the church, and then someone moves, and then someone else moves. And so someone else comes in, but it doesn't seem to grow numerically, and yet they have grown a great deal spiritually.
While we were there, Zach, the fellow that is from Fiji, and his family changed jobs at a town that's probably an hour away. Balcutha is the name of it. So he is getting his family together and going to move there. And that's kind of the tendency of how it is. A lot of these foreigners come in on work visas and work at dairies and places like that, and attend a church because they want the word, and yet they move sometimes more often than not. Well, I think we've overextended our stay. If you do have questions, you know where we live, and we'd be happy to chat with you another hour about the things that the Lord did for us. But we thank you for your prayers and appreciate so much being able to come back and share this with you. And our sharing is not over with yet. So.
Well, we waited a long time to hear about it, so the extra time was worth it. It was interest on the time we waited, yeah. That was great. All right, let's stand, and we'll close out with 3 verses of this next song, if I can find it. Let's wait for our, you guys all know it, but there we go. It's not over 1,000 tongues to sing. There we go. Thank you, and have a great week.